Look, Ma, no hands. Now that's luxury. These are two of the biggest, most luxurious SUVs you can buy right now. But depending on what you want, only one really deserves a spot in your driveway. When you think of American icons, you think of the Mustang, the Corvette, and this, the Cadillac Escalade. No big SUV has quite the same reputation that that thing does, and it's been serving limo drivers and music video producers alike for the last 20 or so years. And then there's this, the Lincoln Navigator, the Escalade's natural rival. A leatherized, squared-off F-150, this thing is not, and even though it beat the Escalade to market in the 90s, coming out 1 year earlier, its reputation never blew up in quite the same way. You know the drill by now. We're gonna go through everything here: interior stuff, luxury features, and the ambitious tech that's inside both of these big SUVs. Plus, we're gonna go over what they're like to drive and live with on the day-to-day. Also, if you want to deep dive into either of these, check out Edmunds.com. We're Edmunds, and we test hundreds of cars each year on the road and at our private track, so you get the most trusted reviews. If you want to know which car, truck, or SUV is the best, then stick with us. Let's do this. This Navigator is Lincoln's best luxury machine to date, but only by a certain definition. Let me show you what I mean. Remember those wraparound sunglasses from the 2000s that are all of a sudden becoming popular again? Lincoln said, why not that, but screen? Lincoln takes a pretty cool approach here. There is this edge-to-edge display, but it's set all the way back at the base of the windshield, so that way all of the stuff here is always in your peripheral vision. You can only customize the widgets on the passenger side of the display though. One big negative, unlike Android Auto, when you're using Apple CarPlay, you can only get Apple Maps to work in this portion of the display. If I cancel this here, you'll see that you get this error message. That's not so cool. Controls in here are a little tricky to get used to. However, you manipulate everything on the screen in front of you with the buttons on the touch pads on the steering wheel. So if I wanted to adjust the position of the steering wheel, I'd click this shortcut button, navigate over to those adjustments, click that, and then go up or down. It's definitely going to take a little bit of getting used to. And then there's this smaller sort of primary touchscreen infotainment display down here. I don't like it as much as I like this other display setup. It feels too low. I have to take my eyes too far off the road to use the controls. Plus, so many of the functions are buried in menus, including the fan direction controls. I don't know how many times I have to say this, but knobs and buttons are just better. But man, if you ignore the tech for just a second and take in your surroundings, you realize you are in a very high quality space. Everything is either leather or wood, and there is very little plastic. The 30-way adjustable, and yes, I did say 30, seats are super nice. They take a little while to set up properly because you have to do it through the screen, but once you get it just right, they are almost perfect. They're comfortable, the leather is nice. Oh, and the heating and cooling and massage, they all work brilliantly. Even this armrest feels luxurious, and it all feels super spacious thanks to this airy dash. Well done, Lincoln. Storage up front isn't that great aside from the massive and super deep center console. You don't have that much in the way of small item storage. There's a little cubby here for your phone, and the cup holders can only fit a normal size cup or something with a smaller bottom. You won't be able to fit something like this in the front cup holder or in the door bin because of the massive speaker. I think it's a worthwhile trade-off because the sound system in here is pretty good. What? Oh, sorry, I couldn't hear you over my super sick headphones that you get back here with this huge center console. They come in this neat felt bag, and you also get a remote for your individual TV. Don't worry, they're marked left-hand side or right-hand side, so you'll know which one is which. Also, they just pop back into the bag, and then you can stick them in the, again, huge rear center console. What's great about the back seat is it's just as luxurious as the front seats. You get the same cool center armrest here with a wireless charger, and you get a little screen that controls things like the seat position, the seat massaging, which is excellent. You also get climate controls, and you can move the passenger seat forward if you're sitting here to give yourself a little bit more legroom. It doesn't feel as spacious back here as what's in the Escalade because of the center console and these hyper adjustable rear seats. If you were to get the regular Navigator with just a bench or regular captain's chairs, it'd probably feel a little bit more roomy. But personally, I would have the heated and ventilated rear seats because why not? Because of the inclusion of this center console, you also get a large cubby down here, but it's a bit of a pain in the neck to get to. It's kind of like that cabinet above your refrigerator. It's nice to have, but it's not that easy to use. So you're probably not gonna wanna keep things that you need frequent access to down here. And obviously car seats fit because this thing's massive. The only trouble with the Super Luxe rear seat package is that the seats take a little while to fold out of your way. It's not gonna be great for airport pickups. That said, getting into the back is actually pretty easy. There's plenty of space back here. I can electrically recline the rear seats. You get a total of 4 USB-C ports and the outboard seats are heated. That's great. Driver, excuse me, the closest in and out, please.
No problem, sir.
Now, obviously, because these cars are huge, you're gonna get plenty of cargo space. The only caveat with this trim is you can't fold down the second row. However, the Navigator has a bunch of cool, fun things I wanna show you about the cargo area. First is this. There is a split folding tailgate, which is always cool. It makes loading cargo a little bit harder, but you can also use it as a bench. Next thing is you can lower the third row fully electrically, which is super cool. You get 2 more USB-Cs, a 12-volt outlet, and a household outlet, because why not? And also, there is a shelf table thing going on. Let me show you what I mean. First thing you do is pop this cover up and pull this little guy out of here. Next thing you do is flip down all of these, let's call them holders, and then lift this up and pop it into place. It holds about 35 pounds and acts as a sort of privacy shelf for anything you want to stick underneath here so nobody can see in through the cargo bay and see what you got stashed away back here. And just in case you're curious, you can also raise the third row electrically. Okay, in the Lincoln Navigator on the road, and well, it just doesn't ride that well. Something tells me the suspension can't cope with how big and heavy these 24-inch wheels are, and the ride just never settles down. It's either floating or pitching or wallowing in one direction or another, and it's constantly jittering you about. It is not exactly my definition of a luxury SUV, and it shouldn't be yours either. Speaking of those 24-inch wheels, it's probably why we have more road noise in here than we'd like to. It just doesn't feel as serene as you might expect. The way I'd explain the ride in the Navigator is it's too firmly damped but too softly sprung. And what I mean by that is when you're going over impacts, the Navigator wants to punish them and just pound them into submission. But once they get transmitted into the cabin, the springs can't cope with the weight of the body, so you're just floating around on stilts. The way I'd like to compare it is think of yourself in a small boat, like a dinghy in the middle of a storm. If you have sensitive passengers, some of them might get sick. Let's talk about this motor. The twin-turbo V6 just doesn't feel as luxurious and as effortless as a lumpy V8 would. Something like you'd find, you know, in the Escalade. It's fine, power's great. It's actually quicker off the line than the Escalade is, but for whatever reason, it just doesn't say luxury item to me. It's smooth enough and passing power or merging power is decent, it just doesn't make a very nice noise, and I want something with more cylinders in something that costs $130,000. Another quirk of the Navigator and the way it drives is this steering. Two things about it. One, the steering wheel is an oval, which feels very out of character for something that's supposed to be big and luxurious. And also, the speed of the rack is so slow that when you're in town, not, you know, going straight on a highway, but when you're in town or in parking lots, your hands are just all over the wheel all of the time. I hope you like palming, because this is the only way you're going to be able to drive it comfortably. The brakes are tuned super weird. They're really grabby at the top of the pedal, and they continue to increase in force all the way into the ABS. They're nice and powerful, but it takes a lot of getting used to get the braking just right. Well, visibility out the front of the Navigator is pretty good. The blind spots are massive. Luckily, when you turn on the turn signal, a small blind spot camera pops up in the instrument cluster, and it's very clear and easy to use, so you might as well not even look out over your shoulder because you're not going to see anything anyway. You also get blind spot monitoring and a bunch of other safety systems like lane keep assist. They all work really well, and in something this big, you're going to want that kind of help. One thing we need to applaud, though, is the Blue Cruise system. It's essentially Ford's version of GM's Super Cruise. It's a hand-free, eyes-on driver aid system, and it works almost faultlessly. I think that in this car, with Blue Cruise, it activates in slightly fewer places than Super Cruise can activate on, but when it is on, it's just as assertive. It keeps you right in the middle of the lane, and it keeps a nice gap to the traffic in front. It's super luxurious, very seamless experience. So the Navigator, it's got a lovely interior, it's got a nice view out, you feel well cocooned in here. The problem is the driving experience just lets you down, whether it's the weird steering, the weird brake pedal, or the jittery ride. It's just not as complete as some of its competitors. Speaking of competitors, let's go take a look at the Cadillac. You think you know the Escalade, right? Wrong. There's a ton of stuff in here that you've never seen before. See this knob right here? It looks nice, but to use and spin around just feels kind of cheap. And you could say the same for the rest of the Escalade's interior. We're not saying it's cheap, we're just saying that for $124,000, it could be nicer. You see this wood finish here? We love the color differentiation and the grain underneath the lacquer, but putting this cover on it makes it feel like a piece of plastic, and they've done it all across the interior, whether it's in the center console or also on the doors. Another thing, if you've been in other GM products, and it's likely you have if you're stepping up from something like a Tahoe to this, you'll recognize plenty of switchgear. This is definitely from a Tahoe. These stalks are on a Chevy Trax, except they're gloss black here instead of matte black. And there's so much parts sharing that it sort of brings down the entire vibe of the cabin. The Navigator isn't completely guilt-free of this. There are also some carryover bits, but Ford has done a much better job. There's just a little too much plastic in here, and a lot of it is that piano black that we hate so much, but I have to give a little credit where it's due. I really like that they've used cloth to cover up the lower part of the dash and some of the doors. We need more cloth in cars, and this is a great example of why. I'm not trying to be super nitpicky here, but if you spend almost $130,000, you deserve greatness, and this just isn't it. The front seats are pretty comfortable. They are nowhere near as adjustable as the ones in the Navigator, but the leather feels nice and they hug you in the sides like perfectly fine. I have no issue with these whatsoever. In fact, I almost prefer them because sometimes finding the position you want in the Navigator is just too difficult. Storage in the front of the Escalade isn't quite as good as what you'll find in the Navigator. You don't get a place to put your sunglasses, but there is a small cubby here, a huge center console, and the cup holders aren't that big. They'll only fit one of these. So if you have a water bottle that's bigger, you're gonna have to buy another one. The first time you step into the refreshed Escalade, you're going to notice this enormous pillar-to-pillar screen. It is super impressive, especially at night. Plus, the colors are great. It's got deep blacks and the resolution is super crispy. Plus, the tech behind it is rock solid. There are no glitches or bugs here. Once you start to dig into the tech a little bit more, it gets slightly less impressive. The big thing is that you feel like there are acres of unused space on this massive screen. There's nothing up here, there's nothing here. It's one continuous panel, but there's nothing going on, and I think that's just a waste of space. Screen for screen's sake is not a luxury touch, and it's not like you can configure these with widgets like you can in the Navigator either. Where the tech does excel, however, is this guy right here. This screen is mostly dedicated to your climate functions, but it has a few other shortcuts. Also, like the head-up display control, the glove box release, all of the parking cameras and stuff like that. It also controls your outside headlights, so you can turn them into auto, off, the fog lights, whatever. The point is, it works really well because it is always right near where your hand sits, and I really like the positioning, I really like the resolution. It's a great idea, so much so that I wish this was the main display. I wish CarPlay and other core functions for the car could be used through this thing. The physical controls that do exist in the Escalade, like the volume knob, the scroll knob, and the stuff around the steering wheel, are all fine. They're nothing special. There's nothing really to write home about here. Another thing, there's piano black here and on the steering wheel where your thumbs go, so you're definitely going to notice your fingerprints every time you hop in the car. One thing worth mentioning, and I think this is an advantage over the Navigator, is the steering wheel controls are much more typical than they are in the Lincoln. You also have a more typical adjustment for the steering column position. One small caveat though, the track forward and backward are up and down arrows, and the up goes back and the down goes forward. It just doesn't make any sense. I don't know why they didn't just put the arrows left and right. The more you dig in, the more cool stuff you find, but you also find some not so cool stuff. However, if you have your maps up, it takes up the entire display in front of you. It's a little bit redundant because you get to see your Apple Maps here and your Apple Maps here at the same time, but at least you're gonna always know where you're going. What's not so impressive is when you're going for the augmented reality camera. It's just a carbon copy of exactly what you can see out of your windscreen, and I don't necessarily know why you'd use it. Remember the old Chevy Astro van? Yeah, they clearly haven't changed the seat design since. Other than the fact that the doors will close themselves and the fact that there's a ton of space back here, it doesn't really feel as luxurious as you might expect for something this big and pricey. These seats were clearly designed to fold and lay flat so you can load cargo into them. In fact, they're very much like the ones you'd find in a Chevy Tahoe. The padding and the leather is fine, but they don't support you and they're nowhere near as adjustable as the ones you'd find in the Navigator. They just don't belong in something with the luxury aspirations of an Escalade. You can get a nicer rear seat package in the Escalade. You can get a center console, much like what you'd find in the Navigator. You do get individual fan controls back here and a set of small cup holders in the center console and some medium-sized door bins, but that's kind of it for storage. Just like with the Navigator, it's cavernous back here, so car seats are going to fit no problem. Just be wary because it is kind of a tall car. So as far as we're concerned right now, the Lincoln wins the back seat wars, except if you need space in the third row. The far back of the Escalade has totally got you covered if larger people are what you need to carry back here, and the seat is acceptable for a third row seat. The problem is the amenities that you get in the back of the Navigator are not here in the Escalade. You only get one USB port per side, and the outboard seats aren't heated like they are in the Lincoln. When it comes to cargo space, the Escalade absolutely has you covered. I mean, just look. Only problem is no cool split tailgate. It also has this, but there are no fun party tricks here. There's no table you can set up, and you can get a tonneau cover, but you have to sacrifice use of the third row because it mounts in front of the third row seats, which I don't really get. This Escalade in particular has the advantage of not having the super luxe second row option, so you can fold both the third and second rows from the cargo area. It also gives you a ton more cargo space as a result. I know we don't typically talk about audio systems when we're talking about cargo, but there are two huge subwoofers back here that take up all the space for ports, so all you get is a little household outlet. In the Cadillac Escalade, the first thing you're gonna notice is it's enormous on the road. It basically takes up the entire lane. It feels like you're piloting a bus. But beyond that, it's actually pretty sharp. The steering is really reasonably weighted and also very precise for something so large. And the ride is really well controlled. Despite the fact that this weighs as much as it does and is based on a truck platform, it has really excellent body control no matter what. It stays very level and the ride is very well controlled. You don't get any of that float or that sort of boatiness that big SUVs typically come with. One drawback of the very solid planted ride is it can be jittery over some bumpy roads, and also this Escalade is on 24-inch wheels, which I personally think is ridiculous. Get the 22s. The engine in this Escalade is so smooth. The 6.2-liter V8 is similar to the one you'll find in a Corvette, and the result is a very smooth linear power band and something that just sounds so good. If I was judging this comparison on engines alone, the Escalade would be the winner. Another issue with the whole body-on-frame SUV thing is that the back of this truck can sound like an echo chamber at times. It sounds like the noise is a dodgeball that's just boinging around off the sides of the cabin, and the Navigator does it too, but it's a lot worse in here. The Escalade handles so well, and because the wheelbase is so long, you actually feel very sure-footed no matter what you're doing. The steering is sharp, the brakes are nice and linear. You get a really good sense of control in this thing, despite the fact that it weighs near 6,000 pounds. Road noise in this is very well hushed, right? There's very little wind noise, there's very little tire noise. You do feel very isolated inside of this cabin, and that's something that a good luxury SUV should always do. When it comes to the brakes, there's nothing to really write home about, and that's kind of how you want the brakes to be, right? They're always there for you. There's good stopping power. The pedal feel is nice and linear. There's nothing the matter with them, and because there's nothing to talk about, I like them. That's it. There are a ton of driver aids, and in something this big, that's kind of what you want. The big note is when you're on the road, there is a blind spot camera, so when you flick on your turn signal, it goes into the infotainment display. The resolution is, I'm not going to sugarcoat it, it's crap, but it's helpful and it's better than not having anything there at all. Other driver aids like the blind spot monitoring, the rear cross traffic alert, the frontal collision warning, they all work super well here, and they really help you sort of keep this thing out of other cars and other obstacles, because frankly, it's so huge, you kind of just need the help. One more thing we have to mention when it comes to driver aids is GM's Super Cruise. It is probably the best eyes-on hands-free system that there is right now. Every time I've gotten into this car and used it on the freeway, I've flipped it on and just sat here like a normal sack of meat because it just handles basically everything. And if it does catch you goofing off, it isn't punitive like it is in Teslas. It won't disengage and then stop entirely. You can just turn it back on, but you should probably just pay attention. Simply put, the Escalade is just the better big box on the road. It's sharper, it listens better to your inputs, it feels like a more willing partner, whereas the Navigator can feel a little floaty and just a little too remote. If you are going to drive all of the time and not be driven, the Escalade's the one you're going to want to pick. Okay, value time. But before we do that, let's have a quick laugh about miles per gallon. They're both massive, they're both heavy, and they're both terrible on gas. Here are the numbers. Does the Navigator feel like it's worth $128,000 as tested? In most places, yes, it has a nicer interior. We prefer the material selection, and we think the tech is better executed, and Ford did a better job of utilizing all the stuff that they put into it. It has a nicer second row, it has a nicer third row, and aside from a few quirks on the road, it is the better big box to buy. The Escalade. It does feel like $124,000, but in fewer places than the Navigator does. It's better to drive, it's better to be in on the road, and the sound system is better. However, when it comes to material choice and quality, the execution of the tech, and the third and second rows, it just loses out. When we put these two up against the Edmunds rating, the Escalade got 7.6 and the Navigator hit 7.7, so the nod goes to the Lincoln. That's not to say the Escalade isn't great in its own right. I prefer its V8 on the road, for example, and we are not saying that the Escalade loses just because this one doesn't have the fancy rear seat package. There are just areas in general where it falls short of the standard that has been set by the Lincoln. Which one would I pick? I'd have the Escalade. I've thought they're super baller forever, their reputation carries more weight, and I want a V8 in my luxury car. That's it. If you've stuck around this far, thank you so much for watching. Please consider giving us a like and subscribing to the channel. It really helps us out, and we'll see you in the next one.